Indonesian Ghost Stories. Folded into a valley, the rice fields a patchwork of pale green and gold, the houses low and quiet, their roofs glazed red with years of sun. The road from the bus stop had been a single-lane ribbon chipped at the edges, the kind of road you don't walk by accident. I had come on purpose. I was a junior producer for a web documentary series on Indonesian folklore, 10 minutes on the stories people still whisper when the lights are out. My pitch had sounded confident in Jakarta. Spend a night in a rural Javanese village reputed to be haunted by a pocong, film interviews and night ambience, and we'd cut it into something moody. Pocong, I'd said in the big white office with overactive air conditioning, is the ghost of a person who died and was buried in their shroud, the kain kafan. If the ties aren't set right, the spirit can't move on. People say it hops because it's still wrapped. It's perfect, recognizable, cinematic. I had smiled like a person who didn't believe in anything that couldn't be taxed. Now, dragging my duffel past a line of banana trees, I found the place Pak Surip had promised, the old teacher's house. Simple, but clean, he'd told me over the phone. You'll be comfortable enough for one night. The TPU, the cemetery, is behind. You want close, right? Close is there. The keys had been left at the warung in a chipped ceramic cup. The warung lady's hands smelled like chilies and tobacco when she pressed them into mine. The house was a single story with walls that had drunk humidity for decades. The paint peeled in curls, a wooden cruciform lighting fixture hung breathless from the ceiling. I set my equipment on a low table. Camera, tripod, shotgun mic, spare batteries, a plastic bag of martabak left over from the bus stop, 2 bottles of mineral water sweating in the heat. The floor, red tile, was cool under my bare feet. Out back, a stand of bamboo leaned over the boundary wall, scraping it in the breeze like fingernails. Beyond, I could see the uneven silhouettes of headstones and the cones of young coconut trees. Someone had left a small oil lamp on the kitchen counter. Its glass was smoked gray. Next to it, a box of matches, 3 short sticks of incense, and a wrap of bananas gone nearly black with sugar. It took a moment to realize that the offerings were for me. As the call to Maghrib bent through the air from the mashola, one thin voice that wavered at the edges like a moth's wing, the house settled around me. The sounds took their places, the tokek gecko clicking from somewhere behind the rafters, a neighbor's radio murmuring dang doot, the wet sigh of a motorbike turning off the road. I lit the oil lamp and placed it on the table to film some atmospheric B-roll, its fluttering shadow making the walls breathe. Desa Karangilang, I said softly to the camera, narrating for later. A small Javanese village standing beneath the shoulder of Gunung Lawu. Here, the dead wear cloth. It sounded theatrical. I cut the take, embarrassed even though no one was watching. I had planned to interview Pak Surip, but he texted to say a storm had knocked out power in the next village and he was helping fix a friend's roof. Later malam, he wrote, be careful, don't go to TPU after Isha. A smiley face followed the warning, which I understood was not a joke. So I ate cold martabak and drank one of the sweating waters and decided to film a walkthrough of the house while the sky still held its last fumes of plum light. The teacher's house contained a front room with 2 windows, a bedroom with a mat and a thin blue pillow, a kitchen, a squatting bathroom with a bucket and tap, and a back door that stuck halfway through its swing like it was resisting a bad idea. I pushed it with my shoulder. The hinges creaked a sound like a drawn breath. The backyard was a strip of dirt and weeds, cracked where the sun had pressed too long. The boundary wall was not tall. My chin touched the top when I stood on the bricks stacked against it. Over the wall, the cemetery. It looked like they always do. Headstones in neat rows tussled with grass, some leaning drunk, others upright and serious. Offerings left on a few graves had curled into darkness in the heat. Jasmine rings brittle as old bones, rice cakes turned hard as pebbles. The wind had shifted. The bamboo scraped louder, a hollow clacking that called to mind bamboo wind chimes, but sharper. The air smelled like damp soil and the sweet sour of melody flowers steeped into the ground. I didn't plan to cross over. I only wanted footage of the headstones against the deepening sky, that cinematic gradient from blue to indigo you can't simulate in post. I set the camera on the wall, framed a shot, rolled it for 50 seconds, and told myself I'd be back after Isha if Pak Surip still hadn't returned. I had promised my editor, no graveyard alone at night. It's easy to promise things in daylight. By the time the second call to prayer drifted and faded, the village dimmed. Whatever light isn't already taken by night in a place like this gets drawn into houses through thin curtains. It sounds like deeper voices, different laughter, a spoon clinking against a glass of Timanis. The radio cut out. Insects took over, their droning a blanket. Something thumped softly against the back wall twice, as if a neighbor had tossed a ball. I waited for a child's voice, a curse, a laugh. Nothing. I almost called out, then thought of the accent of my Jakarta Indonesian and the way it might land here. Too quick, too bright, and decided not to. I set up the tripod inside and filmed the door from a low angle. The lamp was just out of frame, casting a buttery smear across the red tile. My plan was simple. Tell the story. Leave in pauses that editors can cut around, capture the house's sounds. I started. The Pocong, I said, eyes flicking to make sure the audio bars climbed, is one of the most recognizable ghosts in Indonesian folklore. A wrapped figure buried in a shroud with its knots tied, one at the head, one at the neck, one at the feet. If the top knot isn't loosened after burial, the spirit can be trapped, unable to pass to the next world. I let the silence linger a beat, then added in a near whisper, "They say it hops." Something brushed the outside of the back door. The camera caught my head tilt. I swallowed, smiled for form, and kept talking. People leave offerings or call a kiai to read prayers sometimes. The brushing came again, deliberate as a hand sweeping fabric. Sometimes it wants someone to help untie what should have been untied. I stopped the recording. "Hello?" I called in a voice that tried to sound neighborly. "Permisi?" Silence. Then from beyond the back door, a sound I have tried to describe to friends and never managed. Not footsteps, not exactly, a compressed weight striking the ground in quick succession. Thump, 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 as if something bound were taking small jumps to find balance. It came closer, paused, then made one last small hop that thudded against the door itself. I didn't move. A radius opened inside me, fear blooming outward toward my skin, fingertip by fingertip. The latch gave a little quiver first, a tremble not quite movement. Then the wood of the door bowed inward, just perceptibly, as if something leaned against it with the softness of cloth. My mouth went dry. I forced myself to breathe and think in practical terms. Neighbor's goat, a dog, a kid playing a trick. It was too high off the ground for a goat, too heavy for a child, unless he had rocks in his pockets. The Melati sweetness rose and fell, intensified until the back of my throat prickled. Thump. The lamp fluttered. A draft had found its flame. I realized dimly that I had started the camera again. My own breathing filled the mic. "Okay," I said to the lens or to myself. It was unclear. "We'll check, we will check, and it will be nothing." I picked up the lamp in one hand and the camera in the other. The tripod clattered gently closed. The back door resisted, then swung. Wind moved across my face. The backyard looked bare, the wall inert, the bamboo like a row of men with their sleeves rolled up, whispering to each other. I stepped out, and the lamp pulled a tunnel of gold through the dark. "Permisi," I said again, softer. "Ada orang?" Thump. The sound came from the other side of the wall, right where the bricks made a low step. I told myself that if I extended my lamp over the wall and saw a boy crouched there, I would laugh and hand him a banana from the kitchen, and we would be friends, and this would be nothing but a story about my city nerves. I did as instructed by no one. I climbed the bricks and lifted the lamp. The light spilled over the uneven grass and the path between graves and the first row of headstones. On the ground, in the little channel where coffin carriers walk when they lower the dead, lay a thin line of white cloth. It wasn't a line, not really. It was the edge of something. The lamp flame danced, casting and erasing shadows. A slow shape resolved, a long form wrapped tight, the white gone gray with soil and damp, knotted at the top where the fabric bunched like a sack. The knot loosened and tightened in the wind's breath, not undone but not firm, like a fist that might unclench if someone whispered the right name. The shroud rose and fell with the wind, but beneath that, with something else, a tension. The form didn't move while I watched, only the cloth did. A thread, no, a narrow strip, stretched from the top knot and lay like a path across the ground. I thought of stories I'd laughed at in the office, people so sure they'd seen something their minds had drawn to satisfy dread. I lowered the lamp, then raised it again, as if a better angle would end this. Behind me, gently as a friend, the back door swung closed. The thump this time was inside the yard. I turned. The lamplight struck the teacher's house grillwork and flared back, blinding me for a heartbeat. When my eyes adjusted, I saw, beside the bricks where my foot had been, a folded bow of white cloth. It had not been there. I would have noticed. I am not careless with my terror. Then, with a small convulsive motion like a fish's dying twitch, the cloth jumped. It was reflex to step back, to raise the lamp as if light can fend off the shapes that make their own. The cloth sprang again higher. I saw its length now, the way its lower edge was cinched as if tied with invisible hands. Not long, no longer than a person's hip to foot, but weighted enough that when it landed, the tile made a dull sound. The cloth turned, slowly, in place until the narrower cinch faced me. My breath faltered in staccatos. My mind unspooled in pictures. Burial, the 3 knots, how the top one must be loosened after the grave is closed. A whisper came from the wall, from the cemetery beyond. At first I thought it was bamboo, that hollow clack brushed into something like speech by fear. Then I heard it again and knew it for what it was. A woman's voice, too soft to be local and too familiar to be foreign. A voice like a memory of being comforted, saying nothing I could translate. It was more tug than word, an urging. The lamp flickered low, sucked by a breeze that had crept up unnoticed. In that guttering pulse, I saw a thin, gray-streaked corner of cloth where a knot would be on a full shroud form. The little bound thing in my yard trembled once, then sprang, toward the kitchen door, away from me, toward the house. I followed without meaning to, the camera in my hand swinging, catching nothing but a smear of light and red tile and a dark edge of table. Inside the air was warmer, heavy with old cooking oil. The cloth came to rest against the kitchen counter like a person who has reached the end of a rope. It tipped forward, landed with the softest slur of fabric, then lay still. The whisper from the wall threaded through the window, that same urging tone, like a djinn coaxing goats to water. The lamp threw light over the counter and brushed a shape I had not noticed. On the ceramic, where the box of matches had sat, was a knife. A small one, its blade dull with age but sharp-whetted the way old men do when they are alone with too much time. Next to it, a coil of white twine. My stomach turned a slow circle. Someone had prepared this scene. I looked at the cloth. It did not move. I had the thought, unwelcome, clairvoyant, that somewhere in the cemetery was a grave with a top knot that had not been loosened. I also had the thought that someone had bound something else, here in this kitchen, with twine that did not belong to the dead. The mobile buzzed against the table. I flinched so hard the lamp jumped. It was a message from an unknown number. Help. Another line followed before I could reply. In the cemetery, 2nd row from the mango tree. Untie. The sender ID flashed as Yanti, which meant nothing to me, except it sounded like the sort of name a teacher might have. The old teacher's house. The house exhaled. That is the only way to say it. The toquet clicked, the lamp steadied, and beyond the wall the whisper ceased. In the sudden absence, the hopping sound came once more, thoughtless now, a rhythm winding down. I took the knife and the matches and the twine, and I took the lamp, and I stood with my back to the door that led to the yard and imagined telling my editor that I had entered a cemetery after Isha alone. If I had told her in Jakarta that a cloth had hopped in a kitchen, she would have laughed and bought me an espresso. Here, laughter would have stuck in the throat in a way that feels like choking. The yard was colder. Dew had drawn the smell of earth upward. I climbed the bricks, swung my leg over, then the other, and dropped onto the cemetery path. The lamp cast a small, obedient circle. The mango tree was immediately obvious. Its leaves caught the lamplight, their underbellies matte. I counted 1, 2 rows and started along, reading headstones with letters eroded into suggestion. The names were ordinary and vast. Rusdi, Kasiam, Sutrisno, lives contained in briefly legible stone. The 2nd row's 3rd grave was newly mounded, the soil still raw where the grass had not yet crept back. The headstone had a name, and below it 2 dates only 70 hours apart. Around the base lay a scatter of white petals like teeth. And there at the top of the mound the top knot bulged, fabric twisted, not quite tied, not quite free. My mouth said prayers I only imperfectly remembered. I knelt and set the lamp in the hollow at the grave's side. The knot was slick with damp. My fingers slipped. I tried again, easing the cloth rather than pulling it, coaxing the twist the way you coax a stubborn ring from a swollen knuckle. The fabric moved. A sigh came from somewhere I could not place, below, above, inside my own chest, and the knot loosened one turn. I saw then how the cloth had been forced tight, not by clumsy hands but by intention. The twine in my pocket burned against my leg. It took longer than it should have. When the last twist came free, the cloth lay back like a cut rope. The ground beneath my knees softened as if water had been poured into it. The lamp fluttered, rose, and steadied. The air cleared. From the far edge of the cemetery, a thin sound floated, somewhere between a sob and a laugh, and then was gone. Something touched the back of my neck, so light I could have dismissed it as a stray hair, and a word formed in my ear, unmistakable, the first clear language of this night. Terima kasih. I stood too fast, the blood surging behind my eyes. My hands shook. I turned, lamp up, and saw no one. Only the line of bamboo, their long leaves gone still. The path back to the wall gleamed with damp. The teacher's house roof peaked above, solid, almost homely. I felt, with that strange certainty that sometimes attaches itself to fear, that if I left now, the night would let me go. I walked back. As I swung a leg over the wall, the lamp caught on the brick and jerked. The flame leaned, smoked, then righted. I landed in the yard, and the soft thump came again behind me. Not one this time, but many. A ripple of small, bound impacts moving between the graves like a dark current. I did not turn my head. There are moments in life when looking is a kind of agreement. Inside, the cloth on the kitchen floor was gone. In its place, on the ceramic counter, lay the twine. This time arranged in 3 small loops, 2 side by side, one above. The pattern of knots. Next to them, the knife had been turned so its dull edge faced me, its sharp edge toward the door. Someone knocked, the polite way, 2 knuckles on hollow wood. When I opened the front door, light from my lamp laid itself over the figure outside like a blessing. He was older than I'd imagined from his voice on the phone, his eyes washed pale with years, his hand on a cane polished by 1,000 small traversals of the world. "Mas," he said, "I am Pak Sarip. Sorry late. Rain at my friends. Ah, we are lucky. The night is good." I let him in. He sat at the table. He did not look at the knife or the loops of twine, but I watched his eyes slide over them and then away, as if to hold your gaze on certain things is to own a piece of the act that put them there. "I got a message from someone named Yanti," I said. He smiled the slow smile of someone who has left a door open for the wind and been surprised but not displeased when it came in. "Ibu Yanti taught here. This was her house. She died 3 days ago. Head, sometimes is heavy with what is unfinished. We asked the Kyai to do prayers. The family was hurried. Not all things done. I wanted to ask if he had left the knife and the twine. I wanted to accuse him of orchestrating a scene for the city boy with a camera. But the loops on the counter were not accusation. They were instruction. I thought of the knot, of the way it had resisted just long enough to make my hands shake. I thought of Terima kasih at my ear, the light touch like a ribbon pulled through a ring. "Thank you for staying," I said instead, my voice strange in my own mouth. He nodded. "Thank you for coming. Sometimes the living must ask the living to help the dead. Sometimes the dead ask for themselves." He looked at me then directly, a gaze that turned my excuses to wet tissue. "You will film tomorrow?" he asked. I thought of footage that would look like nothing, a wall, a lamp, fabrics, breath. How do you cut belief into a timeline? How do you capture a knot loosening and the way the air feels different afterward? Maybe you don't. Maybe you tell a story where you could have filmed something difficult and chose instead to do something simple and true. "I'll film the village," I said. "I'll talk to you, to anyone who wants to talk. We'll tell it well." We sat in the dim, and the house felt less like a lung and more like a room. He took out a cigarette, apologized, then lit it and cracked the window. The first inhale burned jasmine into the stale oil air. Outside, the bamboo clacked once and was quiet. Somewhere far off, a dog barked twice and quit as if remembering his manners. When he left, I did not bar the door. I lay on the mat and the pillow smelled faintly of detergent and a ghost of someone else's hair. The lamp burned low, then lower, then out. The dark was complete and not unfriendly. Sometime near dawn, I woke to the sense that someone stood beside me. I opened my eyes to absolute black and held my breath, then let it out when the shape resolved into something as ordinary as a folded blanket. My body made the calculus: sleep again or pick at the seam of night until it unravels. I chose sleep. In the morning, dew glittered on the weeds, and the banana skins in the kitchen had collapsed into sugar. The twine was gone. In the yard against the wall, the bricks had been rearranged into a neat step like a patient man had measured them with his palm. I set up my camera and filmed the teacher's house at dawn, light fingering the peeling paint, a gecko slipping behind the cruciform lamp fixture, the line of bamboo tranquil as old men in a warung. Before I left, I climbed the wall one last time. I laid the last incense stick on the mound of Ibu Yanti's grave and struck a match. The smoke rose and swirled and blew itself out. Then, improbably, it caught again and steadied as if someone had cupped hands around it that were not mine. "Terima kasih," I said, with as much sincerity as a person can put into two words they have spoken their whole life, but never used correctly until now. A small gust funneled through the bamboo. It sounded like a woman laughing very softly from across a room. On the road back to the bus stop, the village stretched awake around me. A boy chased a tire with a stick. A mother hosed down her front steps. A motorbike puttered by and the rider lifted 2 fingers. Ordinary, ordinary, ordinary. I filmed none of it because sometimes you only get to keep the part you don't try to hold. In the edit bay weeks later, my footage gave us 10 minutes that people would call atmospheric, too slow until it wasn't. You could hear a brush against a door, a hop you might mistake for a misplaced cut, a whisper that editors fought with EQ and gain and could not make into words. We argued knives and twine on a counter. "It's too on the nose," someone said, and I let them trim it shorter. We put in a map, typed Desa Karangilang over a drone shot from stock because it was cleaner and I did not fight. Sometimes I dream of the kitchen and wake with the taste of jasmine in my throat. Sometimes, when I untie a knot, plastic bag, headphone cord, the sash of a dress, I feel a gratitude that is not mine move through my fingers and out into the air. And sometimes in very quiet houses, I hear a soft, gentle thump, as if someone bound is practicing the way to leave. I do not look for the shape it makes. I do not say I do not believe. I leave a light on. I loosen what I can. I arrived in Desa Karangturi at the height of dry season, when dust lifts in thin veils at every passing motorbike, and the afternoon light turns everything the color of old turmeric. The ojek that dropped me off left a comma of exhaust in the lane. A line of zinc roofs shimmered under the sun, like fish scales. Somewhere a rooster kept insisting it was dawn. My new place, a Kos Harum Sari, according to the blue paint peeling from the sign, was at the very end of a narrow alley. Beyond it lay rice fields, the husks piled in cones like sleeping hills, and the distant soft clink of gamelan from a radio someone loved enough to keep on all day. The landlady, whom everyone called Bu Sari, met me in the doorway with a smile that didn't move her eyes. The room she showed me was small and square, a bed and a wooden wardrobe, a curtain in faded batik serving as a door to the bathroom. The window looked into the alley. I could see a string of laundry crossing the gap like prayer flags. A gecko stared at me from the ceiling and flicked its tail. "It's quiet here," I said, using the polite, careful tone you learn when you're a newcomer. "Alhamdulillah," she replied. "You'll sleep like a baby." As if something heard this, a thud pattered across the roof, soft, fast, like bare feet. I looked up. She didn't. "It's the fruit bats," she said, still smiling. "They play." I paid a month in advance with crumpled bills I'd kept in a zippered pouch since the last city. As I counted, she watched my hands with a focus that made my skin prickle. Behind her, a woman in a gray kabaya moved from the kitchen to another room, carrying a glass of dark, thick liquid. She was frowning in concentration. When our eyes met, she flinched and disappeared. "My sister," said Busari. "She's shy." I put down my backpack and tried to picture my life fitting inside the square. I had come to Karangturi to catalog whatever was left of an old sugar mill for a small museum in the city. The mill was rumored to be full of rusted machines and files moldering in cabinets, exactly the kind of job no one else wanted. I had told myself the quiet would be good, that quiet is like a large, clean table where the mind can lay down its tools. I shook hands with Busari, thanked her, and slept because the heat had made me stupid. That night, first night, something woke me. Not a sound, exactly. The absence of one. The gamelan was gone, the little chorus of geckos had settled, and the rooster had confessed he'd been lying. Even the bats, if that's what they were, had stopped. Then came the faintest rasp at my window. It was the kind of sound you could blame on a branch or a lizard if there had been any branches that high, if lizards scratched like a coin being dragged slowly along wood. I lay still and heard it again, a patient scraping near the latch, like small fingers that had learned the pattern of locks. Before I could decide whether to cough or call out, it ceased. In the alley, something breathed. Not wind. It held a rhythm, a small creature's quick inhalations. I told myself it was a cat and slept, and woke with the strange certainty that something had been in the room while I slept. There was a light sweetness in the air, like the leftover perfume of palm sugar. My zippered pouch, kept under my shirt inside the pillowcase, was where I had left it. I laughed at myself, a single dry sound, and put coffee powder into the enamel mug. At the warung that morning, I heard the old farmers talking about a house 2 lanes over where coins had gone missing every night. Only coins, never bills. Someone, a man with fine white hair and gums stained with siri, said he had seen the thief. A thin child, head too big, skin the color of ash. The others shushed him. People looked over shoulders in the old way, like the story itself could bring trouble. Children, the Ebu who ran the warung said, meaning any unknown entity small enough to curse without fear, will take what is not theirs. That is their nature. I laughed again, but softer, because the woman's eyes were kind, and because, beneath the stove's warmth, I felt the warung's shadowed corners like they were looking back. By the second night, coins had gone missing from my desk. I hadn't meant to leave them there. I paid for coffee with a ERPA 5,000 note and came back jangly with change. I laid the coins down in a small pile, thinking of laundry, of paying the man who sharpens knives who comes every Wednesday, of nothing at all. In the morning, the pile had thinned. I counted and counted again like a man who wants numbers to be a charm. 300 rupiah gone. I told myself I'd miscounted. I told myself I was not going to be a person who calls a landlady to complain about coins. That evening, after the mill, I returned to find a tiny handprint in the dust on my wardrobe door. It was the impression a child might leave after touching a mirror with sticky fingers. Not wet, not oily, just pattern pressed into chalk. 5 small fingers, but the index and middle seemed oddly longer than the others, like a spider had tried to become a hand. I put my own palm over the print. It was smaller than my palm by half. In the kitchen, as I refilled my water jug, I saw the sister again. She held a shawl tight around her shoulders despite the heat. A glass of dark liquid sat on the counter, growing a skin. The smell was iron and herbs and something like bleach. She looked at me the way cats look at strangers, distrustful and measured. "Maaf," I said. "I don't mean to intrude." She shook her head and brushed past me. As she did, I saw that the inside of her forearms were marked with tiny crescent bruises like the bite of very small, very sharp teeth. That night the roof ran with footfalls. Not bats, not cats. Too fast, too many, a patter like rain with intention. I lay still and counted 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, pause. Then the window latch jiggled. I remember thinking, in the way sleep lets thoughts be foolish and absolute. If I open my eyes, it will know I am awake. I opened my eyes. I could make out the shape at the window because the moon was bright. It did not look back at me. It looked into the room with the avid concentration of a thief or a child deciding which toy is best. The head was too large, smooth and hairless, and shone like a river stone. The ears were pointed, angled like a bat's. The eyes were enormous, glassy and pale, not quite white, with a film over them that made me think of a frog. It reached with tiny hands and tapped the glass. The nails made a sound like the teeth of a comb. When it smiled, the teeth were too many. It could not get in. The window latch was old but stubborn. I knew this because, on my first afternoon, it had taken me 10 minutes to coax it open. The creature, and what else could I call it, though I knew the word that rhymed with money and hunger and rumor, tapped again and pressed its face to the glass. The skin looked gray, almost translucent. The smile widened. Then, with the abruptness of a game ending, it looked past me, over my shoulder, into the corner where my bag lay. Coins are a language. They make a sound when you touch them, when you count, when you move them from one hand to another. The room seemed to fill with the idea of that sound. I remembered the farmers, the way they had looked away from the story like it had teeth. Tuyul, the word I tried not to say, bloomed in my mouth like a secret I had swallowed. In the morning, I asked Busari, slow and casual as if asking about the weather, whether there were children in the neighborhood who liked to play on roofs. Anak-anak, she said, voice light. They play everywhere. But at night, she shrugged, then performed a gesture that made me forget whatever else I had planned to say. She interlaced her fingers and cupped both hands behind her back, palms up as if supporting the weight of something sitting on them. It was seamless, unconscious. A second later, she straightened, as if nothing had happened. "You'll get used to the sounds," she said. After that, I began to notice the cupping gesture everywhere. A man passing in the alley did it while he laughed at his friend's joke. The woman at the warung held her hands behind her as she stood at the stove, a familiarity in the pose that made my scalp tighten. It reminded me of the stories, that people who keep a tuyul must carry it sometimes like a spoiled toddler, lifting it on the hands as it rides invisible and heavy. The third night, I set my own trap. I placed a neat stack of coins in the center of my floor and sat awake in darkness with the taste of stale coffee in my mouth. I told myself I wanted to understand. That understanding was a kind of light. But when the patter came, my mind advocated for darkness with the passion of a cowed animal. The latch moved. The window opened. The smell that came with the creature was strangely sweet, the way a cupboard smells after sugar spills. It dropped from the windowsill with a small, ungainly hop, and then righted itself with the jerky focus of something that has practiced being in a body and isn't quite finished. It went to the coins and knelt. Its spine under the gray skin looked like a row of beads. "Hey," I said softly, because fear makes some people shout and makes me polite. It looked up. Those pale eyes rolled in a way that reminded me unhelpfully of a baby discovering a mobile above a crib. It tilted its head, its mouth opened just enough to show the first row of points. I had the sensation of being classified, of being measured, not as prey, as owner or not owner. "Pergy," I said, little more than breath. It pointed at my bag, at the wardrobe, at the pillow. It made a cheering sound. Then from the corridor outside a whisper called, "Nak, Sini." The tuyul froze. The voice was a woman's, soft, coaxing. The little thing looked toward the door, then at me. Decision was a visible thing moving across its face. In 2 steps it crossed the room to the window, pulled itself up with hands and odd, agile feet, and was gone. The whisper, closer now, said, "Anak, Pintar." When I opened my door, the corridor was empty, but the air was colder, like a fridge held open too long. I stood there until the geckos resumed their gossip. In the morning, there were new bruises on the sisters' forearms. This time, the marks were higher up, near the soft skin of the biceps. The glass of dark liquid she carried had left a ring on the table. Next to it lay a handkerchief spattered with tiny flecks of red. I had seen enough to make a choice, pack and leave, or stay and knock on that other door, the one I had never seen open, and invite the rest of the story out. Maybe that's the thing about unfamiliar places. Once they start to talk to you, it feels rude not to answer. I chose wrong. That night, I waited in the corridor. I pressed myself into the narrow shadow where the broom leaned. Around midnight, a door down the corridor opened. The sister stepped out, moving carefully. She carried nothing, but her hands were cupped behind her back. Something unseen shifted there, weightless and heavy at once. She murmured, "Ayo," and turned toward the kitchen. I followed. In the kitchen, a red thread hung from the rafters, tied to a small bundle wrapped in leaves. A clay bowl sat below it, filled with the same dark liquid from the glasses. The sister knelt and began to hum. It was not a lullaby, I knew. The tune rose and fell on only 3 notes, the way a rope swings. When she pulled the shawl from her shoulder, I saw the bandage. She peeled it away, and her skin there was bruised and broken in the shape of a mouth. She lifted the cupped hands to her chest, presenting the space in the crook of her arm. The air brightened, like heat above a road. The tuyul, visible now as if the ritual had brought it wholly into the world, clambered from nothing onto her arm. I had thought of it as childlike. Face to face, it wasn't. The head was too large, yes, the limbs too thin, but its eyes carried an old, concise intelligence. It sniffed at the wound, squinting in apparent pleasure, and latched on. The sister bit her lip. The sound she made was not pain alone. It was relief, too, as if feeding it fed some emptiness in her. "Cook up," said a voice behind me. I turned as if turned by a hand. Busari stood in the doorway, her smile neat and formal like stitching. She held a small brass bell and a string of red thread. "You should be asleep," she said. My mouth tried to form a lie and failed. "What is this?" "What you already know," she said. "Some families plant rice, some keep goats, we keep luck." The bell in her hand chimed once, delicately. The Tuyul looked up, mouth wet, and made a tetchy chirp. When it saw me, its eyes widened. It leaned forward toward me with a sudden, eager, awful fondness, the way children reach for whoever has given them candy. Its hands pawed the air. It wanted to be carried. "No," I said to both of us. "You have money," said Busari, not as a question. "You have work, but work is slow, we help. Pesugihan Tuyul. Everyone whispers it, but they come when their child is sick or their roof leaks. They come. They ask. They bring coins as an offering. They bring other things." Her eyes slid to her sister's arm. "It is an arrangement." "You're stealing," I said, because the word felt hard, and I needed something hard to hold. "We are collecting what wants to be gathered," she said gently. "Coins call to coins." The sister swayed, eyes unfocused. The Tuyul hissed at me, neither threat nor warning, but a sound of jealousy. I took a step back. My heel brushed a stack of clay bowls, and they stumbled against each other with a clatter. The Tuyul flinched, then sprang up onto the rafters with a spry grace that undercut its oddness. It hovered above, peering down between the pots. "Go to your room," said Busari. "Sleep. Tomorrow we will pretend you never saw. You will stay until your contract ends. You will not count your coins before you sleep." "And if I tell?" My voice came out thinner than I wanted. She tilted her head. "Who will believe a city child? Besides, who would want to break a nest? We are all poor in one way or another. We make do." Maybe I would have left then. Maybe I would have gone to my room and packed and never looked back. But the Tuyul decided for me. It dropped from the rafters, not onto me, onto my shoulder. It was weightless at first, like a thought. Then it settled, and weight came in a wave. Cold seeped through my shirt. The little hands clutched my ear, my collar. Its breath touched my neck, a damp sugar heat. I felt something in my pocket shift, my coins, traitorous and eager, and spill into the creature's lap. My knees buckled. Through the noise in my head, I heard the bell again, the red thread whispering as it looped. Hands caught my wrists. The thread tightened. "Look," said Busari, voice a knife wrapped in cloth. "It likes you." This is the point in the story when a person does something simple that changes everything. I did something simple. I said the creature's name. "Tuyul," I whispered, like you'd murmur to a child about to bite an electrical socket. "Liharaku." It froze, its head tilted, eyes narrowing with something like surprise. Names are hooks. Names are doors. It leaned forward until its forehead touched mine. In that moment I felt a rushing, coins pouring, sand slipping, years jerking by like kites. I saw, with the clarity of fear, the shape of my future. Waking to small handprints, the sound of feet on roofs, my palm forever cupped behind my back, offering what I had, what I would have, what I would never admit I wanted. "No," I said again. Slowly, deliberately, I lifted my hands, not to carry it, but to unseat it. My fingers closed around a body both slick and dry. I pulled. It screamed. The sound was needle-thin and huge at once, filling the room without raising its volume. The sister cried out, toppled, clutched her arm. The bell fell and rolled, bright as a coin. The red thread snapped. The Tuyul wriggled, jaw working, teeth clicking. It bit, pain flared, hot, sudden, dishonestly clean. I swore, tightened my grip, and flung it toward the open door. It caught the frame with those terrible little hands and vaulted up the wall like a spider. Everything happened at once. The sister lunged, reaching, pleading, "Nak, Jangan!" The Tuyul scrambled, then slipped and tumbled to the floor with the thud of a sack of rice. It was on its feet in a heartbeat, bare and gray and furious, and then it ran. Past me, into the corridor toward my room. I followed. It knew where my bag was, where my coins were, not because it had seen them, but because every metal circle in the world hummed its song. When I reached the doorway, it was already at the pillow, shredding the case with busy, efficient claws. The zippered pouch spilled its little hoard. The Tuyul sat in the middle of the shine, panting, head lolling with bliss. "Stop," I said. It didn't. Why would it? But in my voice there was something that made it glance up. No magic, just the crack of a thing breaking in me, the wish to be unseen. I stepped forward. I did not disguise my steps. Behind me, the sister wailed, "Please, we'll make another arrangement." "This is not an arrangement," I said, and in that instant I believed myself enough to act like a man who does. I grabbed the water jug from beside the door and upended it over the pile of coins, and the creature crouched in it. Water hit metal, and the coins sang. The Tuyul shrieked as if the water were acid. Maybe it was, to whatever rules it lived by. It scrambled, slipped, and fell. I scooped the wet, slippery armful again, so light, so heavy, and flung it once more, not toward the corridor, but toward the open window. It went out in a gray blur. There was a soft, terrible sound of something hitting wet ground, then only the night and the sudden loudness of crickets. We stood listening. The sister sobbed, small and rainy. Busari's breathing had become a thin, angry whistle. I didn't move. Somewhere on the roof, a new patter began, fast, many-footed. Maybe the bats, maybe the echo of what I had just done. In the morning, the coins were where I had left them, inert and dull. The window wore a smear of something that could have been dust, could have been the memory of skin. The corridor smelled like boiled herbs and old blood. In the kitchen, the red thread was gone. The clay bowl sat empty, a ring of darkness marking where something had been and would not be again. I packed. When I came to the front to pay what I owed, Busari accepted the envelope without comment. The smile she offered was thinner than paper. The sister was nowhere in sight. "Some places don't suit everyone," she said. "You'll find another." "Will you?" I began, then stopped. "What? Will you buy another? Will you keep feeding? Will you remember that I said no?" "There are always children," she said, seen and unseen. As I stepped into the alley, the neighbor across the way lifted his hands behind his back in that absent, telltale way and then, aware of me watching, laughed and turned it into a stretch. Dust lifted at my shoes. The sun laid its heavy hand on my neck. In the roofline above me, something moved, quick and deliberate, the pattern of feet like rain, or like a counting game. On the ojek out of Karangturi, the driver asked, "Baru datang, mas?" "Baru pergi," I said. He nodded like this answered something he already knew. The lane turned to road, and the road to the long, shimmering line that led toward the city. I put my hand in my pocket. My fingers closed around a coin. It stuck to my skin, as if held there by sweat, I told myself, as if anything in the world can be only what it is. When I pulled it out, it was one I didn't recognize. Old, heavy, its face worn thin by the rub of many small hands. I tossed it over my shoulder, a bright arc against the lion's roar afternoon. I didn't look to see where it fell. But for a long time after, I thought I heard feet on the roof of the speeding bike, light and eager, as if a child was running to keep up, laughing and laughing in a voice too thin to call human, too human to ignore. I arrived in the hills above Pariaman at dusk, when the sky had turned the color of overripe mango and the roofs of the Rumah Gadang rose like black buffalo horns out of the trees. I hadn't meant to come alone, but my research partner missed the flight, and the driver who picked me up in Padang dropped me at the foot of a footpath with a shrug and a cigarette tucked behind his ear. "Jalan kaki," he said. "Walk. Banyak cerita di sini. Jangan dengar semua. Nanti hati berat." There are many stories here. Don't listen to all of them, or your heart will grow heavy. I told myself I was a health worker, a rational woman from Jakarta, the sort who trusts lab results, not whispers. Still, when the path narrowed between clumps of bamboo and the air cooled with the river's breath, I thought of my grandmother's warnings. "Every island a different story," she'd said. "Respect them, and they might respect you back." The village appeared all at once, as if unwrapped from the forest. Lanterns glowed in the windows. Roosters chattered in their woven baskets. There was a long, low smell of wood smoke and boiled cassava. Children stopped their game of tag and watched me with sober eyes. When I asked for Ibu Sari, the midwife who had agreed to host me during my research on infant health, they pointed to a house with carved shutters and a veranda sagging like a tired smile. She met me at the door, small and wiry, with eyes that made you feel she had counted your bones. "Salamat datang," she said, and took my bag before I could protest. Her palms were warm. On her wrists, red string and woven reeds. You'll hear things in the night, she added, almost cheerfully. Don't believe them all. Don't disbelieve them all either. Inside, the house was clean in the way of old houses, a patina of oil on the wooden plank floors, a shrine shelf under a framed verse, and jars lined up on a low cabinet, salt, turmeric, betel lime, cloves. I hung my jacket on a nail and realized the jacket smelled wrong here, sharp and city-ish, a stranger among the softer smells of smoke and soap and earth. We ate sweet tea and rice with stewed jackfruit and talked about my project. I would shadow her visits, interview mothers, ask about nutrition, hygiene, prenatal care. My questions sounded thin in my own ears. The babies here were thin too, she said, but not always from hunger. She made a small chopping motion with her hand, an old habit perhaps, to cut off bad omens in speech. There are also the unseen, she said, but you will see or not. People say seeing depends on what you want or what wants you. The first night I slept in a narrow bed draped with a mosquito net. Somewhere nearby a radio murmured. Farther off a muezzin's call thinned into the trees. Fat geckos clicked from the rafters. It was like lying inside the body of a birdhouse, hollow and warm. When I drifted half asleep, something rapped on the roof. 3 quick taps. Then again in another place, a skittering like fingers drumming. I told myself bamboo expands and contracts with damp and heat. I told myself fruit bats pick at the thatch for insects. The third time, the knock came right above my head. A shadow moved across the ceiling, clear even through the netting, a blot against the blue rectangle of the skylight. I sat up. A faint thread of smell seeped down, coppery, like a coin held too long in your palm, and a sweetness that wasn't sweet, like rotten guava. My stomach tightened. The shadow drifted away. The geckos started up again, frantically, as if they'd been holding their breath. In the morning, I laughed it off to Sari over coffee. She didn't laugh. If you hear knocking, she said, tell it you are not a mother. She poured salt into her palm and flicked it toward the door, the windows, the ceiling. And don't open the shutters if anyone calls your name in the night. We went to visit a woman 8 months pregnant. The young husband hovered, polite and exhausted, while his mother sat with her hands folded around a string of prayer beads that never moved. The pregnant woman's ankles were swollen, her belly high, her eyes shadowed. She dreams someone is digging, the husband said when his wife went to the bathroom. Every night, the earth is loose, the sound is so near. He looked at me, a stranger, as if I might carry an answer from the city like a pill in my pocket. I asked about her diet, her prenatal checkups. I asked about the dream. Sari said little, but when we left she tucked a small pouch under the young woman's mattress, a mix of lime and salt and something gray I couldn't place. There is a thing that eats babies in the womb, Sari said when the path dipped toward the river. It prefers the unborn. It prefers the very new. It is an old hunger. I said the word I had come here to avoid saying, to keep the line between my work world and theirs unblurred. Palasik? Her face didn't change. Names are doors, she said. If you say one, you should know what you are inviting. That afternoon the wind shifted. The smell of the river sharpened, and the women who had spread rice on woven mats to dry began to gather it in a hurry. Chickens went silent. A dog whined and shoved its nose under the gate as if embarrassed to be afraid. Somewhere up the slope a rooster screamed, high and human-like. It ended in a wet cough. I looked at Sari. She looked at the sky. Night fell early, with a bruised edge. I helped Sari hang strips of thorny pandanus at the windows. She set bowls of water infused with lime near the doors. She gave me a needle threaded with black string. Tie it to your shirt, she said. Make a cross over your belly. I'm not pregnant, I said, startled into a laugh. It doesn't matter, she said. I lay awake listening for the knocks. They came, sometimes softly, sometimes swift as pebbles thrown by a spiteful child. Between them, other sounds, a sighing along the eaves as if cloth were dragged there, a drip that never pooled, once a wet smack like a tongue on wood. I remembered the stories, a head that detaches, organs trailing like a gore-wet scarf, a tongue thin and long as a snake, nosing under doors, prying between floorboards, the thing that hovers over cradles and wombs, the thing that digs. Sometime after midnight I made the mistake of opening my eyes. The skylight was a mouth. Beyond it, a face hung in the dark like a lantern, the face of a woman, eyes rolled white, hair floating blackly around her as if in water. Everything below her jaw was wrong. It didn't end with a throat. Pale cords and loops dangled, esophagus, trachea, coils of intestine wet as kelp. A heart pulsed dully, patient, as if it had all the time in the world. Her tongue unfurled toward the skylight glass and licked it slow. I didn't scream. It was like being a child in a nightmare where you can't move. The tongue smoothed the glass. The heart went on beating. She tilted her head, not exactly curious, more as if she were smelling, the way a snake tastes air. Then she sank toward the roofline and disappeared. I thought of the pregnant woman, of her dream of digging. I swung my legs off the bed and caught my net in my hair. The house felt both too small and endless, a maze built of planks that had been trees once and still remembered being trees. I found Sari at the kitchen hearth, already awake, adding something to a pot that smelled of lime and ash. "She came," I said. "She always comes when there is a near birth," Sari said, as if I had offered a weather report. "If we are lucky, she will be sated on something dead. If not—" No. Her mouth tightened. She blew across the surface of the liquid, and her breath made a small fog that beaded on my skin. "We have to go," I said. "To Rena's house." She nodded once. "Bring the salt." We went into the night under a sky freshly washed of clouds, moonlight skipping off the river. The village had shut itself like a clam, doors barred, shutters latched. The only sound was our feet in the dust, and once, a single sob that bit off at the edges. We passed the graveyard, a low spread of mounds with old stones tilted like tired teeth. The soil around one of the newer mounds had slumped, a crater as if a pot had been lifted away. The smell that came from it was fresh earth and something raw that made my mouth fill with saliva. At Rena's house, the lantern burned high. The mother-in-law sat as we had left her, hands around her beads, lips moving. The husband stood uselessly, wringing a wet rag. Rena lay on her side, breath coming fast. The room was too hot. I could feel my own breath bounce back off my face. Sari began to chant in a low voice, not words I recognized, but the rhythm of the sea on rock, the cadence of a pestle in a mortar. She painted a circle with the lime water around the bed, dabbed Rena's forehead with something crushed and sharp-smelling. She handed me the salt. "Door," she said. I went to stand by it, my back to the room, the hair lifting on my arms. The first knock sounded above us, like a fist on the roof. The second came immediately, far to the left, and the third not on the roof at all, but in the inner wall itself. So close I felt it in my teeth. The baby made a small sound then, a sound I had heard many times in my work and never in utero, a hiccup that was also a cry. Rena's eyes widened. She grabbed my wrist with a strength that made my bones complain. "Don't let it take him," she said. She used the word amble, to take, as if the baby were a basket or a shirt rather than a person. The lantern's flame bent, as if a mouth had blown across it. The room smelled like milk that has stood too long and a penny rubbed raw. The air near my ankles cooled suddenly, and I looked down to see a streamer, no, a tongue, snaking under the door, flat and muscular, questing blindly until it touched the line of salt. It recoiled like a scalded worm, then pressed again, harder, thinking perhaps its own persistence could teach salt to be less salt. "Buka," a voice said from outside. "Open." It was a woman's voice, the sort that would ask to borrow a cup sugar or to bring you a bundle of banana leaves for tomorrow's wedding. It said my name perfectly, soft and coaxing. "Ayo sayang, buka." Come on, dear. Open." I clutched the latch until my knuckles clicked. "If someone calls your name," Sari had said, "do not answer." So I didn't. I stood there breathing, and the tongue pressed and pressed. The lantern guttered. In that wavering darkness, the tongue withdrew. There came a soft scrabble as of fingers searching wood grain, and then a long scritch through the wall near the bed. Rena made a sound I never want to hear again, not from an animal, not from a person. "Here," Sari said to me without looking. She held out the pot of lime water. "Pour it over the wall." I poured. It smoked faintly where it ran. The scritch stopped. Something thumped on the roof with a sound like meat dropped on a cutting board. The mother-in-law's beads snapped. Seed-like beads rolled across the floor and popped underfoot. Rena pushed then, with a sound that was not fear but fury. I remembered the first time I witnessed a birth, how old and animal and holy it is to be the door a person comes through. I looked at her and felt something in me unclench. Whatever lurked outside might be older and hungrier, but this, too, was old. This, too, was hunger. This had teeth of its own. The roof shook. A dark shape blotted the skylight. A face peered in, mouth smiling with a friendliness that had nothing human in it. There was hair floating, there were organs swaying, there was a heart beating, and under all of it, the slender, determining lines of a woman's mouth. Someone's daughter, someone's neighbor, someone's mother. She looked right at me, and I knew her. I had sat across from her that afternoon, my notebook open. I had watched her beads slide and slide. The mother-in-law's lips parted around my name like a pearl. She wasn't in the chair anymore. She was above us, and her body somewhere was waiting, hollowed at the neck, guarded by thorns, or not guarded at all. I didn't think. I grabbed the broom of stiff palm ribs from beside the door, snapped its string, and flung the brushy end up at the skylight. It hissed where it hit glass, the way salt had hissed on the tongue. A squall of breathless anger filled the room. A baby's wail sharpened into an adult's fury. The head jerked back. The house creaked as if waking from a long nap. "Push," Sari said to Rena, calm as a tide. "Sekarang." She pushed. Life slid into the world with a wet rush and a fragile, irrefutable cry. I had my hands on the baby without remembering how they'd gotten there. He was small and furious, slippery with beginning. I lifted him into the circle of Sari's arms while she whispered the first words into his ear. Outside, something clawed the roof and then fled, the sound of it dwindling along the eaves and away like wind working free a sheet of tin. The husband sobbed. Rena laughed and cried at once, a hiccuping joy that dissolved my knees. The mother-in-law's chair sat empty, beads scattered like seeds around its legs. We did what there was to do. We washed the baby and Rena. We fastened a charm of 7 threads to the cradle. We put salt lines where there were not yet salt lines. The husband, eyes rimmed red, went out with a lantern and found the mother-in-law's body half hidden under the granary, neck like a snapped sapling, a ring of thorns near her throat, kicked over. She had been careful for years, maybe. Careful sometimes isn't steady, only intermittent. He covered her with a cloth and sat beside her until morning, saying prayers he had known since he was small, and prayers he made up on the spot because no prayer he knew fit this exact shape of grief. By dawn, the village knew. Word moves in places like this the way rain spreads through a shirt, everywhere at once. No one looked surprised. No one looked relieved. They looked, to a person, tired. Someone fetched the kepaladesa. Someone else fetched a coil of rattan rope, though for what, I didn't know. I stood in the middle of it all, my hands still smelling of blood and lime, and thought of what I would write in my report. I had come for numbers and found a hunger you couldn't count. In the city we say wickedness wears suits and carries briefcases. We say harm is human-made and that we can fix it with policies, with clinics, with education. All true. Yet here, too, there is harm, and it has a shape people name so they might name their fear. They don't laugh at one another for telling it. They tell it to each other to keep each other alive. At noon the men went to the cemetery. They filled in the sunken grave we had passed and placed stones heavier than a woman could lift alone. They scattered thorny branches. They muttered the names of those who still might be born in this village, as if names could anchor babies like boats in a sudden current. That evening, long after the last plastic plate had been washed and stacked, long after Rena had fallen asleep with her son's foot like a curled leaf against her wrist, I sat on the veranda with Sari. Moths battered the lantern. To our left, the bamboo talked to itself, a green clicking. "You see now," she said, not unkindly. "I wish I didn't," I said. "Seeing is not always a choice," she said. "Believing, yes, but sometimes belief is not a doorstep you cross. Sometimes it is a river you find yourself already in." I thought of the mother-in-law's face behind the skylight glass, the thin line of scar I had noticed at her throat when she had leaned forward that afternoon, how I had thought it was from a cooking accident. I thought of the way she had said my name, right as if she had practiced it. I thought of my own grandmother, who had been born not far from here, who had kept her neck wrapped with a scarf, even in hot weather, who had told me not to laugh at what other people know to be true. Under the lantern's light, I noticed the smallest ache at the base of my skull, a pressure as if a thread were pulled tight just beneath the skin. I told myself it was the night, the lack of sleep, the sugar I drank instead of food. Sari looked at me, and for a long moment neither of us said anything. Then she reached out and tied a single black thread around my wrist. "For a journey," she said. When I finally went to bed, I tied the net carefully. I salted the windowsill the way she had taught me. I lay down and counted the beats of my own heart, steady, human. On the roof, something shifted, but it was only wind working a loose reed. I closed my eyes, and for once the darkness came all at once, like a kind hand. "You want an ending. You want me to say that the village was safe after that the graves held, that the babies were born and fed, and that hunger found other places to graze. You want me to say I returned to Jakarta and wrote up my report and never woke with the taste of iron in my throat, that I never caught myself listening for wings, that no one has ever called my name from the other side of a door in the middle of the night with a voice I love. I can say this. The next morning, the baby opened his eyes and looked as if he had chosen the world. I can say that Rena laughed, and the laugh made the air lighter. I can say that the men put new thorns on the rafters, and no one said the word Palasik out loud for 3 days, as if the syllables themselves were a scent that might draw something back. I can say, too, that before I left, an old woman, one of those who always seems to be sweeping and never has a speck of dust to show for it, stopped me at the edge of the path. 7 generations, she said, and she tapped the center of her forehead with a knuckle, light as a bird pecking bark. A curse is a story told through blood, but so is a blessing. You can tell another story. I didn't know which story she meant. Perhaps I still don't. But some nights, when the house settles, I hear 3 knocks, roof, wall, floor, and I do not open the window when a voice I love says my name very soft. On those nights, I tie the black thread tighter, and I tell the empty room as gently as I can, I am not your mother. And some other nights, with the same gentleness, I say, I am not your daughter. Whether that is an open door or a closed one, I cannot tell you. I can only say this is a beautiful country, layered with beliefs like leaves pressed into a book, and that laughter and fear live side by side here, and that if you come, ask the people their stories and do not mock what you hear. Perhaps you will see nothing at all. Perhaps you will see everything. And if you hear knocking, remember the shape of your own heart in your chest, stubborn as any lantern flame, and decide what story you will answer to.